"You're walking in with nothing," Graham Mercer said, soft enough to sound civilized, loud enough for the granite hallway of Suffolk probate to do the rest. He had Piper Shaw on his arm, blonde hair set, diamond bracelet catching the courthouse light, both of them moving half a step ahead as if the hearing had already ended in his favor. Clerks, junior associates, waiting litigants, security staff, enough eyes. In rooms like that, cruelty likes witnesses. You do not have to prove a woman lost if you can make the hallway glance at her and decide it for you. By sunset, Graham meant to have Naomi Ellison erased twice. On paper and in public, Naomi felt the bent edge of the weathered Navy portfolio against her coat and kept walking. No flinch, no lowered eyes. That was what bothered him. Not that she had come without the look he wanted attached to her. The discarded wife, the one already finished. So Graham pressed. He turned just enough for Piper to hear and said, in that clean courthouse voice, that Mercer District Partners was never the thing Naomi built. Piper's smile barely moved. Her pity was sharper than open contempt. Naomi kept her face still, the gold knots at her ears bright under the hallway lights. Silence can look like weakness to people who have never had to use it carefully. Then she gave him one line. "I'm not here because I'm afraid, Graham. I'm here because I prepared." That landed differently. His eyes dropped, just once, to the portfolio under her arm. Small movement, important movement. The company he kept trying to pronounce as his alone stop sounding settled for a second. It sounded disputed, and Naomi, standing there by herself, no longer looked like a woman asking to be spared. She looked like someone who had come to collect. That calm had not been born in the hallway. It had been built at 2 in the morning in a cramped Brighton one-bedroom with a radiator. That knocked and a stove light. That flickered when the space heater ran along. By then, the dormant Mercer District Partners inbox Graham had forgotten existed was back open, and Naomi was searching one word at a time. Deed, trust, transfer, founder, signature, closing. By sunrise, old attachments. Public library printouts of bank records. Tax folders and notebooks were feeding a desktop folder named Ledger. One unpacked hard hat photo from the first Roxbury warehouse stayed against the wall, and watched her do it. Beside Graham now, Piper leaned in with a whisper sharpened by impatience. While Graham was staring at the weathered Navy portfolio. He knew it from the $35 drop leaf table, from takeout noodles and reheated coffee, from the nights that warehouse was still only a possibility, and Naomi was the one turning his wanting into numbers. The twitch in his jaw was small, the memory inside it was not. Then Court Officer Ramos opened the hearing room and called the matter. A hallway can be staged, a record cannot. Graham straightened his charcoal jacket and reset his face. Piper lifted her chin and followed like someone still certain she was already seated in the future. Naomi adjusted the portfolio under her arm and stepped through the doorway. Inside that worn Navy shell was the beginning he had spent years trying to clean up. The first deed, the original wire from the Ellison Legacy Trust, the closing records, the emails, and the thin old agreement with the faded blue tab, and the clause he had skimmed close to 11 at night because he said he trusted her more than anyone. He had brought posture. She had brought sequence. By the time she reached counsel table in the 5th floor hearing room, this was no longer a fight about sympathy. It was about old money, old labor, and old signatures, and the day, at last, was turning back toward the beginning. Years earlier, before the Harbor Glass and the courthouse, Naomi met Graham Mercer in a Jamaica Plain coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday. His loafers were soaked. His laptop was dying. The redevelopment deck he turned toward her had more hunger than math. He talked about neglected blocks and boarded windows like a man trying to speak a future into being before anybody with money returned his calls. Most people would have heard ambition and moved on. Naomi heard appetite, yes, but also a project. When she pointed out where the number sagged, he didn't bristle. He listened, really listened, across that tiny round table. His attention felt like recognition, and her own instinct to see what others missed rose to meet it. She had not yet learned how easily being needed can masquerade as being deeply seen. What she knew then was simpler. His hunger matched something in her, and that was enough to begin. Before Mercer District Partners became something people in expensive coats pretended they had always believed in. It was the Alston walk-up, thin walls, bad heat, a $35 drop leaf table buried under yellow pads, a calculator, reheated coffee, and takeout cartons gone soft at the edges. Graham paced through another day of polite no's while the first Roxbury warehouse kept edging toward somebody else's signature. Sometimes he practiced the next investor call in the bathroom because the tile echo made him sound more certain. Naomi stayed at the table and did the harder part. She worked days in housing and nights cleaning up books for small landlords, then came home and turned his appetite into numbers. She rebuilt budgets, rewrote the proposal when the first version failed, cut fantasy out of the deck and replaced it with dates, contingencies, contractor estimates, and terms a lender could actually follow. When the financing language started nodding, she reached for Mina Desai and asked the questions Graham did not know enough to ask yet. He kept selling the future. She kept making it legible at 2 a.m. That is how the deal stayed alive. Not by vision alone, by a woman beside a scarred table, refusing to let the first building slip away before money had even agreed to believe him. And when ordinary financing still would not hold, the rescue came from her side of the table. The warehouse was close to slipping away. Time had narrowed. The bank still hesitated. Naomi looked at the numbers, then at Graham, and reached for the Ellison Legacy Trust. She knew exactly what that meant. Family money entering a shared dream does not arrive alone. It arrives carrying memory, obligation, and the dangerous hope that love will keep the record straight. Across the drop-leaf table, with a half-eaten carton of dumplings between them, Graham took both her hands in his. He said he would repay it. He said everyone would know what she had done. He said the first closing would be the beginning of something bigger, and that the final structure would reflect her place in it. The money could be wired. The credit could only be promised. Naomi believed him because, at that table, believing him still felt reasonable. She was not saving a stranger's fantasy. She was saving the future they had built together. Night after night, under weak heat and cheap light, and when the trust-backed capital moved, the first Roxbury warehouse stopped being a near loss and became the first proof. Mercer District partners could exist now, even if the truth of whose hand made it possible still lived more in private vows than in public memory. Then the cranes multiplied. One warehouse became 3 acquisitions. 3 acquisitions became a broader portfolio. The sublet room over the copy shop gave way to harbor glass, concierge desks, and the kind of Boston rooms where wealth liked to perform modesty while studying everyone else's usefulness. Graham learned the costume fast. Better suits, sharper hair, a smoother voice at dinners, and a cleaner story. At first he introduced Naomi as the smartest person he knew, then as his wife, then, sometimes, not at all. He asked her not to mention the Ellison Legacy Trust in front of capital partners. Too complicated, he said, before the harbor gala. He glanced at her pin coils and called them to unstudied for that crowd. Men whose calls she had helped script shook his hand, laughed at his timing, and looked straight past the woman who had built the numbers under his confidence. Success had not changed the origin. It had just made the truth socially inconvenient. In those rooms, self-made sounded prettier than accurate, and Graham began to love pretty more than true. By then, Naomi could feel the downgrade repeating itself from table to table, until resentment started following her home. One night after an investor party, the Beacon Hill duplex went quiet enough for the refrigerator hum to sound loud. Graham set his watch on the veined stone with deliberate care. His phone lay face down on the island. Naomi stood there in the kitchen they were supposed to have earned together, and said what the evening had made. Impossible to ignore. He had let people treat her like a guest in a company she helped build. He did not rush to deny it. That would have required shame. He only exhaled and told her she was making business to personal, as if the beginning were a sentimental detail, as if budgets, financing calls, and the first money were just moved around his success. The words landed colder because he said them calmly. Naomi looked at the Long Island, the stone counters, the showroom quiet of the room, and felt the place shift under her. The duplex stopped feeling like home. It started feeling like a life curated to display him and edit her. And once you hear yourself being recast as inconvenience, you start noticing who is being positioned as the better fit. Soon the better fit had a name. Piper Shaw was not presented to Naomi like a secret. She was presented like a solution. One evening in the duplex, Graham slid an invitation to the Mercer District benefit across the counter and mentioned Piper in the same offhand. Register he used for donors, boards, and placements, young, effortless, connected, the woman who handled philanthropic relationships, the one made for rooms like the Boston Harbor Hotel ballroom. He said it as if he were discussing strategy. Naomi heard the verdict underneath. Piper was useful because she moved through that world without friction, which meant Naomi, by contrast, was now being filed as the woman who made things heavy by remembering too much. In that kind of culture, some women build the thing and some women get chosen to wear its shine. Nothing in his tone had to be explicit. The insult was subtler than that, which is why it cut deeper. He was telling her, with casual certainty, that Mercer District Partners no longer needed the person who made it workable. It needed the person who looked effortless beside the result. By the time the invitation lay under the kitchen light, Naomi could already feel the next humiliation ranging itself in public. The Boston Harbor Hotel ballroom shimmered the way certain rooms always do when wealth wants to look effortless. Gold light, white linen, crystal. Naomi recognized half the men near the bar because years earlier, she had written the notes for the calls that got them in the door. But in rooms like that, the person who built the numbers is easy to ignore once the numbers start wearing a better suit. Graham did not stay beside her long. He drifted toward the donors and capital partners as if the evening had a current, and that current led straight to Piper's shop. Piper was already laughing by the bar, blonde hair set, diamond bracelet catching chandelier light, moving through the room like it had been built for her. When Graham's hand settled at the small of her back, nobody flinched, nobody looked confused. The men Naomi had helped secure only smiled wider and made space for them both. She stood there with a glass warming in her hand while the network around Mercer District Partners looked past her and blasted the replacement in real time. Betrayal is one thing. Social permission is another. Later, her phone lit up with the finished version. A ballroom photo under chandelier light. Graham and Piper posed like a polished public pair, his hand at her lower back, the caption tying them neatly to Mercer District Partners. Naomi stared until the screen dimmed. What had been deniable an hour earlier was now branding. After midnight, the Beacon Hill duplex was quiet enough for the refrigerator hum to sound accusatory. The photo lay on the kitchen island between them, its caption still glowing. Naomi asked about Piper the way people ask about a wound they can already see, not for discovery, but because sometimes you need the person who made it to say what it is. Graham barely glanced down. He answered in that calm, managerial voice he used when he wanted cruelty to sound reasonable. Piper was easier in those rooms. Piper understood the life around Mercer District Partners. Piper did not, he said, turn everything into a problem about the past. Then he gave the sentence the photo had been preparing her for. You never fit the life I built. Built. As if the $35 drop leaf table in Alston had been somebody else's beginning. As if the budgets, the lender calls, the trust money, the reheated coffee, the first Roxbury warehouse were only atmosphere around his ascent. Some rejections arrive shouting. The dangerous ones arrive edited. Graham picked up his watch and walked away from the island. Naomi stayed where she was while the kitchen held its expensive silence around her. He still controlled the room, but after that line, he no longer controlled the truth of what he meant. She did not follow him. She opened the laptop before morning. In the gray quiet of the duplex, Naomi logged into the dormant Mercer District Partners operations. Inbox Graham had forgotten still existed. Deed, trust, transfer, acquisition, founder, signature, closing. She searched the words one by one, not like a wife arguing with memory, but like a claimant building sequence. The first Roxbury warehouse began coming back in pieces, old attachments, vendor emails, financing threads, a wire copy with the Ellison Legacy Trust sitting where it had always sat. By sunrise, her desktop held a folder named Ledger. Pain had not vanished. It had changed jobs, and Graham's first mistake was already becoming visible. He had assumed the past was gone, because he was finished, valuing it. By the time Naomi was in the Brighton one-bedroom, the radiator knocked at night, and the stove light flickered when the space heater ran too long. The thick white envelope was waiting outside her door. She stood there in socks reading words cold enough to make her hands go numb. Graham was asking the court to name Mercer District Partners his separate property. The petition said Naomi had made no meaningful operational contribution. It sought exclusive control of the company, the Beacon Hill duplex, the Lake Winnipesaukee house, the accounts, the future profits, 6 months of temporary support. And then what she had helped build would belong to him on paper, as completely as he had already tried to make it belong to him in public. She read the same paragraph again at the tiny table while the apartment clicked and hissed around her. Then her phone lit up. Piper, do the graceful thing. Graham has moved on. Dragging this out will only make you look bitter. In that world, dignity is often renamed until it means silence. Naomi stared at the message until the pity inside it showed its teeth. This was no longer just rejection. It was coordination, legal language on one side, Paula's cruelty on the other, both saying the same thing: disappear, and let the story stay clean. On the counter, still not hung, sat the framed hard hat photo from the first Roxbury warehouse. Naomi picked it up and looked at the two of them smiling in the 20-degree wind. Her gloves forgotten, both faces still open enough to believe effort would be remembered honestly. Edward Klein's name was on the papers now, and his kind of language had already done its work, supported, emotional, incidental, as if she had been an ornament standing beside a deal instead of one of the beams holding it up. But she remembered the weight, the drop leaf table bought for $35, the yellow pads, the contractor budgets, the nights Graham practiced investor calls in the bathroom, while she straightened the numbers at the kitchen table. You can be trained to doubt your own value. Sometimes it only takes one degrading sentence to make you reach for the box that proves otherwise. Naomi crossed to the closet, rose onto her toes and dragged down the gray banker's crate from the top shelf. Old tax folders, notebooks, legal pads from Alston, paper dust on her sleeves. Then, under a grocery receipt, her fingers found the small black USB drive with white tape across the side, MDP launch files. She held it in her palm and felt something return that had nothing to do with hope. Physician, by morning, she would not be answering Graham with hurt. She would be answering him with records. The law office above the Dorchester drugstore had not changed much. Quiet carpet, plain light, a glass bowl of peppermints on Minna Desai's desk. Naomi set the divorce petition down first, then the small black USB drive still wrapped in the grocery receipt that had hidden it for years. Minna listened without interrupting. The first warehouse, the trust money, the budgets. The lender calls Graham did not know how to answer. The way Mercer District Partners had been built in real hours and then rewritten in public, as if Naomi had only stood beside it. When she finished, Minna picked up the drive, read the white tape across the side, and asked, very evenly, whether Graham knew she had kept it. Naomi said no. That was the first moment the room gave her back any air. Minna turned to the petition, read the lines about separate property and no meaningful operational contribution, then tapped the page once with a fingernail. Graham's first mistake, she said, was forgetting who organized everything, not who loved him, not who believed in him. Who organized everything? The difference mattered. Hurt could be minimized, records could not. Minna told her not to rush into defense. Let Edward Klein tell the clean version first. Let them commit to it, then answer with the wire, the files, the structure, and the signatures. One page at a time. By the time Naomi left, the petition no longer felt like a verdict. It felt like an opening move, and for the first time since the envelope hit her floor, she was not carrying the truth by herself. By the time the hearing began on the 5th floor, the room was still arranged around Graham Mercer's version of reality. He sat at counsel table in a charcoal suit, silver pen laid neatly beside his hand, looking like a man who had already rehearsed how victory would appear from a distance. Piper Shaw watched from the bench behind him in a fitted dress and diamond bracelet, one hand near the back of his chair, smiling as if she were already seated inside the next chapter of his life. Naomi took her place beside Minna and set the weathered Navy portfolio on the table. Graham saw it. His jaw twitched once, then the performance settled back over his face. Judge Elena Alvarez entered, everyone rose, and when Edward Klein began speaking, he did what men like him do best. He made injury sound administrative. Mercer District Partners was Graham's separate property. He said, Naomi had been generously supported during the marriage. Whatever money had once moved through her family trust did not create ownership. Whatever tasks she had performed were incidental, marital, administrative. No meaningful operational role. No basis to touch the company, the properties, or the profits now. Each sentence landed with the soft cruelty of something designed to sound reasonable to strangers. Naomi felt the correction rise in her throat anyway. The budgets, the calls, the first deed, the nights. Minna did not look at her when she said, barely above a breath, wait. So Naomi waited. She watched Piper give her one small, pitying look. She watched Graham keep his eyes forward. She watched Edward keep sanding her down until the erasure was total. Not forgotten, not undercredited, nothing. That was the story they chose to put on the record. And that was exactly what Minna wanted. A lie is weakest at the moment it believes itself complete. When Minna rose, she did not raise her voice. She carried pages from the Navy portfolio to the evidence stand with the patience of someone who understood that order can be its own form of force. First the wire transfer, then the first deed, then the closing statement for the Roxbury warehouse that had become the seed asset. Beneath Mercer District Partners, she asked the court to look at one line. Sender, not Graham Mercer, the Ellison Legacy Trust. Edward was up immediately. A family accommodation, he said. Temporary help, not ownership. Minna answered without heat. A real loan has terms, interest, repayment language. This transfer had none. It was recorded as founding capital for Roxbury Warehouse Holdings, LLC. Founding capital, not a favor dressed up later as memory. You can charm a room, you cannot charm a sender line. Naomi saw the first change in Graham then, not dramatic, just color leaving his face by degrees. His thumb grinding against his knuckle under the table the way it did. When he realized confidence was no longer carrying him, Minna kept walking the court through the paper trail. Contractor budgets, vendor payment emails, financing notes, direct correspondence with Marisol Vega. There was Naomi's name again and again, attached to draw schedules, revised numbers, lender language, payment timing, and terms Graham himself had once needed translated into plain English. Edward tried to call it administrative help during a marriage. Minna answered with specifics. Naomi negotiated contractor payments. Naomi reviewed financing terms. Naomi communicated directly with closing counsel. Naomi kept the first deal alive when it almost slipped. By then, Judge Alvarez was leaning forward. Piper's posture had changed too. Only slightly, but enough. The room had heard the opening fiction. Now it was hearing the build underneath it. Not support, not decoration, operation. Minna did not let the room recover from the same stack. She drew an older email and asked that it be read into the record. It was from the period before Graham had trained himself to speak, as if he had built everything alone. Without the trust-backed acquisition, he had written, Mercer District Partners would not exist. The finalized structure will reflect Naomi's role. The sentence moved through the hearing room like cold air. Judge Alvarez looked over her glasses. Mr. Mercer, did you write that email? There are moments when denial stops being available and only minimization is left. Graham said it was early, informal, something written before the company had taken final shape. Edward tried to soften it with context. Minna did not need the help. The authorship was enough. The promise was enough. His own words had already done what argument could not. Then she widened the frame. The first Roxbury warehouse had not been the only trust-backed beginning. The second acquisition followed the same pattern through a related entity. Then the third, same underlying source, same structure beneath the shine. What Graham had presented as his expanding personal empire was, on paper, a repetition. One warehouse became three became the legend. But the money remembered differently. Naomi did not turn around, but she heard Piper move, a small withdrawal, her hand coming off the back of Graham's chair, the soft tap of jewelry against her bag clasp. A future can start wobbling long before it falls. By then the room was no longer deciding whether Naomi had merely been around at the beginning. It was listening to Graham's own record say she was part of its foundation. Only after the funding pattern was fixed in the room did Minna reach for the thinnest document in the pile. Faded blue tab, fewer pages than the bank records. Easy to ignore if you were in a hurry and mistook trust for careful reading. Naomi knew that paper before Minna named it. For a second she was back at the $3 to $5 drop leaf table in Alston. A half-eaten carton of dumplings opened between them, Marisol Vega's email arriving close to 11. Graham reaching for a pen while she told him to read the whole agreement first. He had smiled, tired and certain, and said he trusted her more than anyone. Then he signed. Love makes some people careful. It makes other people careless. Back in the hearing room, Minna laid the operating agreement for Roxbury Warehouse Holdings, LLC in front of Judge Alvarez and read Section 9. For allowed, if trust-backed capital had been used to acquire, secure, refinance, or expand assets under Mercer District Partners, and concealment or improper transfer of marital or trust-connected property was shown, voting control may revert to the primary beneficiary of the Ellison Legacy Trust. Pending judicial review. Behind Graham, Piper went completely still. Even Edward's interruption came faster this time. One asset, he said. One warehouse. One old agreement. Minna was already answering. The first Roxbury warehouse had not remained one isolated holding. It had been folded into the larger portfolio, leveraged outward, and used as the foundation of Mercer District Partners itself. The origin was not separate from the growth. It was the base of it. Judge Alvarez asked the next question directly. Was Naomi Ellison the primary beneficiary of the Ellison Legacy Trust? Yes, Minna said. And on the acknowledgement page was Daniel Cho's name from the time the agreement was signed. Naomi watched the meaning settle across Graham's face. Not memory now. Not intimacy. Structure. The clause he had skimmed at a cheap kitchen table was standing in court with his signature on it. And now all Minna had to do was show what he had tried to move once he thought Naomi was too erased. To fight back, Minna did not let the clause stay theoretical. She told Judge Alvarez that Graham had not only buried the Ellison Legacy Trust beneath the public story of Mercer District Partners, he had kept moving around it, side LLC after side LLC, revised ownership charts, transfers made during the divorce itself, and some of those transfers, she said, were tied to assets being positioned around Piper Shaw. That was the first time Piper turned toward him for an answer. There are words men use when they think volume can put structure back in their hands. Graham shoved his chair hard enough for the legs to scrape and said Mercer District Partners was his, that he had built it, that nobody was taking control of what belonged to him because of an old paper. Judge Alvarez cut across him before the sentence could finish. Sit down. Edward's hand went to Graham's sleeve. Client management now. Not strategy. Minna stayed calm. If the court had trust-backed capital, concealment, and transfers through related entities, then the remedy could not wait. She asked for a forensic accounting review, an immediate hold on disputed assets, and temporary administration of the trust-backed holdings by Daniel Cho pending review. Naomi watched Piper's fingers close around her bag, watched color leave Graham's face a shade at a time. The room had stopped seeing a founder in command. It was looking at a man afraid of what the next documents would say, and the rest of the afternoon belonged to them. What followed was slower, meaner. Across the gray afternoon, Minna walked Judge Alvarez through the web one entity at a time. A holding company here, a revised cap table there. Lady mails written to sound routine, and now reading like concealment. Every chart took something Graham had tried to keep abstract and pinned it to a date. Edward still objected, but the objections got shorter, so did his answers. Behind Graham, Piper was no longer sitting like a woman already installed in the future. She had both hands on her bag now. Naomi could hear the faint click of its clasp. Each time another line led back to Mercer District Partners and then away, again through a side entity. Then Minna isolated the Lake Winnipesaukee transfer. Separate entity, post-notice date, standing preservation order already in place. By then the courtroom windows had gone gray with winter. Judge Alvarez looked down at the timeline, then up at Graham. Was the date accurate? Had notice already been served when that move occurred? A courtroom changes when the question stops being what you meant and becomes when. Exactly, you moved the asset. Piper leaned back as if distance could still be created by posture alone, and Graham was suddenly staring at a yes or no problem. He tried the oldest narrowing move left to him. When Judge Alvarez asked about the post-notice transfer, Graham said his team had handled it. Staff. Internal processing. The kind of language people reach for when they want responsibility to blur at the edges. Minna did not argue with the blur. She picked up one page and removed it. The signed consent for the Winnipesaukee move carried his name. Not Mercer District Partners. Not some unnamed assistant. Graham Mercer. For a moment nobody spoke. Even Edward had nothing ready except a hand back on Graham's sleeve. Naomi sat with her hands folded and felt something stranger than triumph move through her. Not joy, not revenge, just the long, tired steadiness of having facts stay facts in a room that could no longer call them bitterness. Sometimes the truth does not arrive like a victory. Sometimes it arrives like the end of carrying something alone. Judge Alvarez looked at the signature, then at Graham. After that, there was nothing left to explain before consequences, only a brief recess, and the silence that followed him into it. After the recess, Judge Alvarez returned with a voice so even it made the words heavier. The court would order a forensic accounting review. The disputed personal and corporate assets would be frozen. Transfers connected to Piper Shaw would be suspended. The trust-backed holdings would move under Daniel Cho's temporary administration pending review. And until further order, Graham's access to company accounts, sale proceeds, and investment distributions would be restricted. Mercer District Partners, the Beacon Hill duplex, the Lake Winnipesaukee house, The life he had worn like proof of superiority was suddenly being named in the language of restraint. Everyone rose, Naomi did too, and locked her shaking knees in place. Across from her, Graham stayed on his feet while each limitation settled over him. It did not matter that the judge never raised her voice. Calm procedure can do damage shouting never touches. By the time Judge Alvarez finished, the displayed world around him looked different. Not gone. Worse than that. Held, watched, reachable only through review, before the last consequence had fully landed. Piper was already moving. Piper stood before the room, had even finished exhaling. Graham reached for her hand in the space between the council table and the hallway. The old reflex of a man still assuming proximity meant loyalty. She pulled away so quickly the diamond bracelet flashed once and disappeared into the sleeve of her coat. "What do you actually own?" she asked him. No one raised a voice. They did not need to. Humiliation sharpens when it stays polished. He started to say it was temporary, a review, something that would be fixed. Piper looked at him the way people look at a building after the scaffolding comes down and the cracks finally show. "You said Naomi was nobody," she said, and then she turned toward the elevators. She left alone by the time the doors closed. Graham was standing in the granite hallway with his phone buzzing in his hand. Lenders, capital partners, the same people who had once laughed under chandelier light and called him inevitable. Now they wanted explanations. Naomi saw all of it without slowing. The polished future on his arm was gone, and with Piper gone, there was nothing left between her and the man who had wanted this hallway as a stage. "Naomi," Graham called behind her, like disbelief could still function as authority. She stopped in the bright granite hallway with the weathered navy portfolio tucked under one arm, and Minna beside her. Around them, clerks, junior associates, awaiting strangers perform that courthouse courtesy of looking busy while seeing everything. This was the corridor he had chosen for performance, the place where he wanted the crowd to glance at her and decide she was the one who had lost. Naomi turned only halfway. You finally know what it feels like when somebody else decides which version of the story gets heard first. Then she kept walking. She did not wait for his answer. In the same hallway where he had tried to make humiliation look official, Graham was the one left reacting. Outside, the winter air hit clean. The stone steps held cold. A bus hissed at the curb. Black cars nosed through traffic. Bundled strangers kept moving past the courthouse as if nothing upstairs had just shifted the balance of a company, a marriage, a life. The city does not pause for anybody's reversal. Naomi tightened her arm around the navy portfolio until the bent edge pressed into her coat. It mattered more than sympathy ever had. Paper had carried her farther than pleading. Her eyes watered in the wind. Not grief. Not this time. Minna stayed beside her without steering, without filling the silence. Just there, steady. After so much noise, the wind arrived quieter than Naomi had imagined. Colder, too, and truer. Naomi had made it only a few steps into that cold when Graham called after her. From the courthouse doors, Minna touched her arm lightly. You don't owe him a conversation. An older version of Naomi might have turned because he wanted her to. This one turned because she chose to look. She saw him without any of the shelter he had worn for years. No Piper, no Edward Klein, no Mercer district partners ranged around him like a wall. Just Graham on the stone steps with a loosened tie, a phone vibrating in his hand, and the smaller posture of a man who could no longer hide inside performance. Sometimes you need one last look, not to go back, but to let your earlier self see what fear looks like when the polish comes off. He came down one step and stopped there, as if even now some part of him understood there were lines he no longer got to cross. He said he had been angry. He said he had been afraid. He said the deals, the calls, the pressure of keeping everything upright had gotten inside his head, until he believed giving her an inch would cost him everything. His phone kept vibrating in his hand. He ignored it. There it was at last. Not confusion, not mistake, fear. Naomi let him finish. Then she said, calm as winter, "You took miles from me and called it business." He flinched harder at that than he had at the order upstairs. Then he reached for the word he had abandoned when success taught him to prefer I. Maybe they could repair what he broke, he said. Maybe they could still fix this. Naomi looked at him for a long enough second to hear the traffic behind him. That word had once belonged to the drop leaf table, the first wire, the years before he learned to make partnership sound inconvenient. No, she said, there's no we left. What comes next will not be rescued by a word you remembered too late. It will be the truth, the forensic accounting review, and whatever kind of man you are when the room stopped clapping. Graham said nothing. Sometimes silence is not reflection. It is the moment language realizes it has stopped working. The word hung there for a beat, useless now. Then Graham asked the question people ask when power is gone and only memory is left. He asked if she had ever really loved him. Naomi did not answer right away. The cold caught at her throat, and for a second she was back at the $35 drop leaf table in the Alston walk-up. Legal pads open, takeout going cold. His hand reaching for hers across numbers neither of them could have carried alone. Then the first Roxbury warehouse, hard hats, 20-degree wind. The two of them smiling at a future that had not learned how to lie yet. Some beginnings are true even when the ending is not. Yes, she said softly, I did. That was real. He looked at her as if that answer should have returned something to him. Then he asked what shame was left if the love had been real. Naomi pulled the weathered navy portfolio closer against her chest. Not loving you, she said. That is not the shame. She held his eyes. The shame was letting your blindness make me doubt my own value. He had wanted the center of the wound to still be him. It wasn't. A black sedan from Mina's office eased toward the curb. But Naomi did not move yet. Minna stayed beside her and let the moment be hers. Behind them, Graham was only a man on the steps. Naomi held the portfolio and looked back toward the courthouse doors. Toward the fifth-floor room where papers had done what pleading never could. They had put her back into the record, back into the story, back into her own name in public. She had expected justice to feel loud, a slam, a spectacle, something hot. Instead it felt like cold air and steady footing, not rescue. Recognition. Minna touched Naomi's arm, asked if she was ready. Naomi nodded. She tucked the weathered navy portfolio under her arm and walked to the waiting car. Graham did not call after her this time. No apology, no argument, no more borrowed words. When the door closed and the courthouse began to recede behind glass, Naomi understood the one thing Graham could never freeze, transfer, or own, not her worth. She was not leaving rescued. She was leaving remembered.